Right, so before we discuss how the Polestar 1 drives, it's probably worth revisiting what it is, because there's lots of interesting things going on with this car. It's a really, really fascinating piece of kit. So, I mean, just start with the looks. Now, it's basically the Volvo Concept Coupe, or Coupe Concept, made real. And if you're unkind, you say it looks a bit like a two-door cut and shut Volvo S90. But see it in the flesh, and it looks so much better than that. This is a seriously good-looking car, and it's good-looking because it does the coupe GT thing differently to everyone else. I mean, we're in Italy, and they like their cars in Italy, and everywhere we drive in this thing, it's like guppy fish at feeding time. People are slack-jawed. They almost walk into lampposts trying to get a look at it. It looks really, really, really good, I think. Now, there's more to the Polestar 1 than the way it looks, because the bodywork is interesting in itself. So instead of normal sheet metal or aluminium, it's made of carbon fibre reinforced plastic, the same stuff that BMW uses for bits of the i3 and bits of the i8. And it's a lightweight material which allows Volvo to get the weight of this car down to, and I say down to with a little bit of a caveat, down to 2,350 kilos. Now that's still quite heavy, but when you consider what's going on underneath this car, you'll understand that actually that's a pretty good figure. So mechanically, why is it so heavy even with such a lot of lightweight carbon fibre reinforced panels? Well, so this is a plug-in electric hybrid, so we've got internal combustion and electric motors, plus a battery that runs down the transmission tunnel and across the rear underneath. And at the back we've got two electric motors, one for each wheel, so this has proper active torque vectoring. So those two motors combined put out about just over 200 horsepower. There's a third motor, which is effectively a powerful starter generator which sits between the internal combustion engine and the gearbox which drives the front wheels, and that's putting out somewhere around 100 horsepower. Then you've got the internal combustion unit itself, which is from the T8 series, so it's a 2 litre and it's got a turbocharger and a supercharger, and that is cool because a Lancia Delta S4 has a turbocharger and a supercharger, and that's a really cool car. And they've also added a carbon fibre plenum induction for this car, which is even cooler. Now the total output, internal combustion engine, electric motors, is just over 600 brake horsepower, which is quite a lot, but it's not as much as the torque, which is 738 pounds-foot of torque. And because a lot of that comes from the electric motors, it's instant torque. So this thing is quite quick. But before we get to that, what else have we got to look at? Well, inside, it's even more Volvo. But do you know what? It gets away with it because the S90 it's based on has got a pretty cool interior. It's kind of that minimalist. It's all generated off the touchscreen. There's lots of cool Scandinavian materials that you don't normally see in cars. I mean, here it's your standard carbon fibre, but they've put special leather on the seats, the stitching, yellow seat belts, and it works. This car costs £139,000, which is quite a lot, but you don't feel like you're shortchanged. Yes, as a 2+2, the rear seats are a bit cramped, but that's not why you buy this car. You buy it because it's a coupe GT and you want to stand out and you want to do something different, and my word, this thing does things differently. So let's start with the performance. Well, it's not quite as fast as you'd expect 600 horsepower to be, but then it is carting around nearly 2 tons. But even with just the electric motors on, so we're in pure electric mode now, you get quite a lot of performance. You get that instant torque. It feels like a normal T5 would, so you've got just over 200 horsepower, so it would really. And you just put your foot down, off it goes. And it's really, electric cars, they just do that thing. You don't tire initially of that instant torque, that instant surge. Now you can do up to 100 miles an hour just in pure electric mode, and it will do it for about 80 miles, which is further than most plug-in electrics will go, which is quite cool. I've said cool quite a lot, haven't I? Damn saying cool. So we've got our various driver modes. Now the electric mode, as we've discussed, that's the one that gives you up to 80 miles, just the rear wheels driving. 200 odd horsepower. We've also got, if we go on our drive mode selector here, we've got hybrid, which mixes internal combustion and the electric. It decides when and where it's going to do that. We've also got individual, where you can mix and match, and importantly, we've got power. And that, according to this graphic here, is for sporty driving. So let's put it in power. Now, with power, we're getting both the internal combustion engine and the electric motors. And, well, it's quite quick. So you get the instant torque, you put your foot down, and the thing just takes off. It's quick. And I'm not going to pretend it sounds as good as a V8 or a V12, but it sounds different and it sounds good. It's a different kind of noise, an interesting noise. So you've got that carbon fiber plenum, so you get the intake noise from that. You get the whine of the supercharger. You get a faint whistle from the turbocharger. Then you get the electric motors spooling up, and there's a different kind of whine from the planetary gears doing their things. It's a really fascinating kind of orchestra of noise. It's a technical noise, it's a mechanical noise. It reassures you that this isn't some sort of aloof high-tech machine. It's one that appeals to drivers. It's a fascinating engineer's car, and I really like it. You can revel in all the different things that are happening, and they're seamlessly integrated, so you don't really feel the petrol engine or the electric motors shuffling the various amounts of torque between themselves. That bit of it, the electronic brain, does that brilliantly, but the noises are there to let you know what's going on, and that's really fascinating. Now, where the Polestar 1 does do a good job of disguising its mass is in the way it goes around corners. Now, we've got double wishbone suspension at the front, multi-link axle at the back. Interestingly, the adaptive dampers, Volvo's adaptive dampers, they've been thrown in the bin, and instead we've got some very expensive Öhlins dual valve dampers, which are also adjustable, but you do have to have a spanner and about half an hour underneath the car to adjust them, which is both strange on a £139,000 sports coupe. You can't imagine getting out in their best suit and grovelling around under the car, but it's also, I'm going to use that word again, it's really cool. It's such a geeky barroom fact to tell people, oh yeah, I've got a spanner and I have to adjust my dampers like that. Maybe that's just me. Now, they're in their sort of mid-setting at the moment, and in fairness, they do a good job. Now, the guys at Polestar were saying their Volvo colleagues consider this car to be way too firm. A Volvo is much softer, they say, but actually it rides in many respects better than a Volvo. Yes, there's some firmness there, but it rounds off all the edges. There's a plushness, an expensive feeling to those dampers. Over these sort of broken Italian roads, we get some thud and the occasional crash over really nasty stuff, but the rest of the time you're not distracted by the ride. It does a really good job, but it's in the corners that this thing really does its thing. Now, there's not a great deal of feedback from the steering, but it is very progressive. It's nicely weighted, and so you can just place the car where you want it, and then you just turn in and it grips and it goes. It's an eerie feeling because the electronics are so well calibrated that you feel it working, but it's not intrusive. And there's no way a car this big and heavy should be able to go through corners like this. I mean, it's not perfect. Out of some slow stuff, if you really gun the throttle, there's a little smidge of torque steer fight as the internal combustion engine tries to put down the power at the same time as the rear motors. But other than that, even the brakes, they're a bit snatchy at low speed as the regen and the friction sort of fight to decide who's going to slow the car. But once you get some load through them and you're trying a bit harder, they're nicely progressive. This thing will cover ground at an astounding rate, and despite all the technology going on underneath, it feels analog. You know, it's not razor sharp, it's not full of feedback, but it is an entertaining thing, and it does stuff that you just think a car this big and this heavy shouldn't be able to do. And of course, because it's four-wheel drive, you can really throw it around even on these slightly greasy roads. I'm really enjoying this. It's a really clever piece of kit, and yet it'll do the other thing as well. You can just slow down, dial it all back, put it back in pure electric, which I'm going to do now. And it's silent, and it's smooth, and you trickle through villages and towns. It has character, this car, and maybe the flaws are what make it so interesting. But the more time I spend in it, the more I like it, and the more I think it might not be so bad, the future after all. There are interesting cars coming, and this sort of sets the tone. Yeah, I like this car.